Nobody. Hello, 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 and welcome to PitchZone. I've always been wondering, if you change just one word in your copy, will it have a truly profound impact? This is the kind of question that we will be dealing with today with our special guest. But before I bring her in, let me say hello to my co-host today, which is not Nathan Gold, but Scotty Spursum. Scotty, it's so great to see you.
Hello, great to see you too. I'm pleased to be here, and I love words, as you know. So
Exactly, and that's exactly the reason why you are here today, Scotty, because you are our language specialist on our team here at PitchZone. And when I saw who's our guest for today, I couldn't help to say, okay, Nathan definitely deserves a break from time to time as well. And let's have this conversation here with language experts, right? So, Scotty, a real pleasure to have you here as my co-host. I think you will be
absolutely.
doing a lot of the heavy lifting today because this is really right up your alley. So, let's bring in Erin. Erin Lebax. It's such a pleasure to see you here today, Erin. I've been reading your book and it is fascinating. Welcome to Pitch Zone.
Oh, thanks so much, Claudio. I'm really glad to be here with you and Scotty. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Oh, such a pleasure. And before we start to dive in, let's quickly say hello to our viewers that are joining us on YouTube and on Facebook. The first one, of course, Nathan. He cannot resist. He cannot stay away from Pitch Zone. So if he's not co-hosting, he
He's here.
is supporting us here in the comment section. And
Great.
then we have Anthony from San Francisco. Anthony will be one of our guests in just a few weeks. So, Anthony, always great to see your name in the comments here. And of course, Nathan, wait. I love words too. So, yes, but Nathan, yes. And then we have Tatiana. Tatiana, so good to see you back. Tatiana was our guest last week, and we had a blast learning from Tatiana about engaging your audience. So if you missed that episode, go back into the channel and into the Pitch Zone playlist, and you will see that it is so much fun and actually easy to engage your audience, especially in an online meeting like we are here right now. All right, and here is the reason why Nathan really isn't here. These cats are out of my league. And yes, it's language is such a, we use language unconsciously, right? We never really think too much about, oh, okay, now I need to put in a verb and a noun. And no, we don't. We process it unconsciously and we use it unconsciously. And this is really where the power of language comes in. And then we also have Massimo Peroncelli joining us from Thailand. Massimo, it's great to see your name in the comments here as well. So with that, I think we've gone through the comments right now, and it's time to really kick this off. Oh, here, Massimo is mentioning, they call me grammar Nazi, so I will learn something. And yes, Massimo is unbelievable when it comes to language, especially because English is his second language as well. He's been the editor of my book, The Founder's Guide to Presenting. And I so appreciated your attention to detail and to simple words and making small little changes here as well. And then Tatiana says, I have international students in my college classes, and I think about all the idioms I use. So we'll probably have a little bit talk about idioms and the way that they can or cannot translate into a different culture. So that's enough from me. Let's kick this off. Erin, I've been reading your book for the last 2-3 days, and I nodded pretty much on every single page. If you would have to distill your book into just one sentence or one paragraph, what would that be? What's the main message?
The message of that book, thanks for that great question. The book shares with folks, when we write with intention, we can better meet goals and build relationships. And I think it comes back to what you were kind of saying a moment ago, that we write somewhat unconsciously, just like we speak. It comes out. Our brain can generate all of that, but we don't necessarily realize that the impact of those words can affect our goals and whether we reach them, and can affect the way our reader feels about us. The way we speak about other people can impact other relationships as well. And so by bringing that intentionality and awareness, we can really use language as a tool and really own our writing, instead of what I find with many learners is feeling controlled by their writing because of the way we've grown up, typically associating writing with some kind of fear or judgment. But writing is ours to use to meet our goals. It's not something that only a textbook or teacher knows the right answer to. And so the book tries to put writing in your hands. Let's get empowered and do what we need to do with our writing on purpose.
All right. And so the book is called High Value Writing. And the message that I got from it is really to use more action words rather than nouns. Can you make an example of when it is beneficial to look at the sentence and say, hey, wait a second, I'm using a noun here, something like decision or motivation or one of these intangible nouns, and go hunting for the verb that's underneath it?
Yeah, great question. And he's right. Claudio's right. I talk a lot in the book about how verbs really are the most, powerful words we have in our arsenal for two reasons. Number one, they help us be concise. And this will kind of provide an example, but I'll come back to your question specifically as well. But they can help us be concise. I could say, Scotty, Claudio, myself, we all got ready for this meeting and contributed our part. Or I could say Scotty, Claudio, and Aaron collaborated. And the one verb would capture that whole story. And so for that reason, a verb can help us be concise because they tend to carry more information than other words. Secondly, though, a verb can help us set tone, where I could change collaborate to cooperate, and it's a slightly different tone and different meaning. So we're looking at verbs both for the informational side of a word and staying concise and meaning forward. But we're also looking at verbs for the way they set a tone and can therefore affect a relationship that we have with our reader or a listener. And so a quick example that we could use right now about staying away from the noun version, I could say Claudio, Scotty, and I are having a discussion about writing, or I could say the three of us discuss writing. So have a discussion, discuss, not too different in the meaning, but that's an example of how have a discussion feels a lot more static and descriptive. But if I say Scotty, Claudio, and I discussed, we're getting things done, we're moving forward, and it's a lot easier for the listener or reader to attach to language that they can imagine happening, like we discuss writing versus we have. That's a little harder to visualize.
Yeah. Well, also, and Claudio, I would take issue actually with what you said earlier, in that you said we speak unconsciously, and especially for people who are pitching for venture capital or a new business idea, or trying to convince a client to do something. I think we have to do what Aaron mentioned, which was really be aware of the audience and to speak intentionally and to write intentionally for that audience. Sorry to poke at you a little bit, but
oh, no, at all, no, not at all, not at all, not at all. This is actually what makes this, number one, interesting, and number two, I'm always happy to learn, especially from specialists like you, right? And so, just a quick side note that although Erin is a writing coach, everything that she is saying today absolutely applies to presentations, right? Because especially in presentations, you want to be concise and you want to be able to get your audience to see things in a moving way, not in static images, but more so, if you bring up internal images, to not bring up a picture, but bring up a movie, and you can influence that, of course, with your words greatly. So Tatiana mentioned here that being concise is becoming increasingly important as we create shorter and shorter online content. And it's, I think, not just the online content, even meetings, the duration of meetings have been getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? So who wants to talk a little bit about being concise and really compressing your language?
Well, I'll take that on a little bit and get us back with verbs for a moment, because that Tatiana's comment connects also with your opening question, Claudio, about whether one word can make such a difference. And a recent story from class really illustrated this concept of what a verb can do. And then we're going to use those verbs to help us be concise. Where one of my clients where I've been teaching for years, I kind of know the students after a while, the professionals who work there. And one of them told me in the last class, he said, Erin, oh my gosh, I hate to admit it, but this was the first year I donated money in our food drive for children around the holidays. And he felt badly. He's realizing, you know what, somehow it just never sunk in that I needed to do this. And this year I finally did. And I said, well, what do you think the difference was? And he said the marketing material had always said, please donate, please provide a donation. And the whole verb was donate the whole time. Well, this year, the marketing material said, we are asking for money to help children in the community. Will you help kids in the community? And by going from donate to help, this person's mind changed. I think he associated donate with maybe a more bureaucratic and financial oriented feel, and help with a more community feel. And that made a difference for him. And so verbs, again, are where we want to put our attention. And when we're being concise with verbs, one of the most important things to consider is in making sure that your verb is not the verb to be. That is the verb with is, are, was, were. This verb is the enemy of concision. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything. And if you say Erin is, what does it mean to is? We don't know. We can't picture someone ising. So clearly I'm going to have to bring in other words. And maybe I say a teacher. But if I would have said Erin teaches from the beginning, I wouldn't have needed to do that. And so we want to shift kind of our lens and look at words intentionally through whether they carry a meaning or whether they're just there on the page. And so that's one way to be concise, is avoiding that is or are verb that will always require you to bring fluff words to support it, and getting into a more visual active verb that a reader can imagine.
Yeah. And also, I think it's important, again, like getting back to knowing your audience, because certainly in the investor world, I came out of corporate finance, and for stockbrokers, investing 101 or having a client 101 is that you need to know your audience. And by knowing your audience and using the right intentional words and the tone, it can also be your tone of voice as well as the tone of words. When you are more concise and portraying the right thing to your audience, they have time to intuit it. They have time to hear what you've said, hear fewer words, understand it, and make it register more efficiently than when we use too many words.
That's so interesting, Scotty, because you're right. If I give someone 12 things to digest, or I give them 7 things to digest, surely they'll do better with the 7. This is just human nature. And we're finding, like you all brought up about meeting lengths, book lengths are reducing, social posts are reducing, Teams posts are reducing. But kind of to take Scotty's comment on tone, and then I saw Nathan put in a comment about how people appreciate that concision. And it's so true. That is a way to respect your reader's time, which is a way to respect your reader. But kind of putting those two comments about how it's nice to be concise. Concise is nice, right? But then Scotty's idea on tone, I often get the question, can I be concise and nice? Because yes. Some people feel like as soon as they get uber concise, now that they feel like they're being maybe harsh or direct. And then they'll end up bringing in a sentence or two of fluff to sound nice, but nobody wants to read extra fluff. So what do? Well, we can be concise and nice at the same time if we go back to that verb. We do not need to add more words to change our tone in all cases. We can often just change our verb. So for example, I could say something maybe not super relational to someone who, let's say Tatiana, she puts in her comment, I could say, oh, Tatiana, thank you for logging on. Thank you for attending. And, I said thanks, but it sounds a little impersonal to me with those verbs. I could then add niceties, but what if I just switched the verbs and said, Tatiana, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. And I've said the same amount of words, but I've changed the tone. And so we can actually be concise and nice simultaneously by really honing in on that verb again.
Ooh, I love it. Concise and nice. It even rhymes. Wonderful.
Yeah, I
so
also. Oh, go ahead, Naren.
Just that the verbs are kind of where it's at. And then if we bring in the cultural element, I mean, I'm thinking about how we have folks from around the world, which is wonderful. This is also where we want to check our verb's tone in terms of whether it jives with our audience. And so, quick example on that, I earlier was saying how collaborate is such a wonderful verb, right? Because it tells a story. It covers a paragraph of information in one word. However, I brought that up. I was saying that same story in a group with only Western Europeans. And somebody said, actually that verb has difficult undertones for us in Western Europe because of World War II. We actually avoid collaborate. And so putting together, now we can look at a verb in so many ways, right? First of all, we use it to be concise, narrow it down, make a tight sentence. Who did something? What did they do? Subject, verb. After that, we say, well, is my verb tonally appropriate, right? Am I saying thank you for joining or just thank you for logging on? And then thirdly, I even have to think about culture with my audience, right? Is this a verb like donate versus help that's really going to inspire this person? Or does this verb like collaborate carry cultural baggage?
And that happens also with idiomatic phrases. That my son was working for a big global company for years, and they were traveling the globe pitching this new revenue opportunity for internal sales. And they continued to use football analogies. In the US, it landed really well. In the Midwest, the East Coast, no problem. They got to Asia and Europe and other places and realized it was not landing at all. And fortunately, my son played soccer as well, so he was able to flip really quickly because soccer or football is certainly more popular around the world than it is in the US. So, so getting to like language and toning your audience, I also think you need to be comfortable with your tone and your body language at the same time. So, and while you do this, you have to experiment with language. Saying things with a smile in your voice. I think you can write things with a smile in your voice. As Aaron said, starting with a thank you or thank you for thinking of me if you're in a business situation. If you're pitching for venture capital money, then you also need to try to make sure that you can get the story across to your audience so they understand the pain point. Because not every story lands with every person in the audience. Do you have any suggestions, Aaron, for like emotional words that help people how you draw people into your story, like how you can get that emotional connection maybe with pitching a new story or pitching a new business idea?
Yeah. And so, by the way, I do know there are other words in the world than verbs, but I'm going to come back to them again because verbs can actually help us create that emotional connection. I'm thinking now about verbs that I use to describe other people, not just verbs for my own actions. But if I want to get an emotion across, let's say respect, which we should infuse our writing with, right? And I'm talking about a new manager, Belinda, and somebody says, who's doing this project? I go, oh, Belinda is in charge of this project. It's fine. I said she is something. I could have actually said Belinda directs this project. Belinda oversees this project, supervises if it's technically true, right? And so now I'm showing more respect for her by saying she directs the project, not she is in charge of that. And so that's one way we can bring that emotionality. But I think what we want to consider overall with Scotty's question is just keeping in mind verbs land in two ways for your reader or your listener. They land informatively and they land emotionally. And just sort of like that idea, are you attending or are you joining? Same information, different emotion. So I'm looking at words when I want to say something to people. This is my informational goal, but I have a relational goal too, of protecting the relationship or even improving it. And so one way, it's quite silly, but that makes it fun. We do it in class. One way that I encourage people to look, oops, do I accidentally have something emotionally odd in my writing or speaking? And we can talk in a moment about sort of trigger words for listeners and readers as well. But I suggest that when you've written out your speaking notes or your email draft, that when you read it over in your mind, consider different moods that your reader or listener could be in, and you'll catch things that could be hurtful if you read aloud in a snarky, sarcastic, negative voice in your mind. So we do this in class to unearth emotion. Maybe I'm saying to a group of people, thanks for coming to the session yesterday. You should have learned everything you needed in the session, but if you'd like more, here's a link. Well, if I say it's snarky, you should have learned, and now I'm going to change that. We hope you learned, because I realize, ooh, that sounds a little aggressive and it even maybe accusatory. I better take this thing on myself and say, we are the ones responsible. We hope you learned, instead of putting all the responsibility on my listener or my reader. So a lot kind of unpack there, but that idea of shifting responsibility, describing things, and making sure that when your reader or listener interprets with their own mind, that your words are ready for their interpretation. And we don't always know how someone's going to interpret things. And that's why I advise reading things in a snarky tone to unearth words like you, your, shouldn't, or words like should in general, and negative words that can put a listener sort of at an emotional disadvantage or create distrust or think that the writing or the speaking is condescending, these types of things that we don't want our readers and listeners to feel.
Wow, this is so powerful, Erin, this reading it in a snarky tone, right? Because usually when we write something, whether it's a script for a presentation or whether it's an email or a book or whatever it is, we usually write it and then we read it in our own intended voice.
Yes.
But that may not necessarily be the voice that the other person is reading it. So by pulling it into an extreme of snarkiness, something absolutely pops up. So wow, very, very cool. Before we continue, let me bring up a couple of comments because our viewers here are pretty active online today. Massimo has a question related to, the juggling act between being too formal. Maybe the motivation could be to show that you have a good education, and too informal, right? Where you want to go and reach a wider audience. Is there, do you have a suggestion to find the right balance here?
I do. A couple of things, briefly, and then I'll answer a little more, that I think we can do to sort of gauge how formal to be. And it won't work in every situation, so I'll talk more. But if you have received something from the person you're writing with, we can often mirror their level of formality. We can sort of observe, ooh, what do they seem to expect? We're still saying hello, not hi. All right, that gives me a clue, right? They're using semi-bureaucratic sounding language. That gives me a clue of where we're at. And I adjust my formality based on the reader. Typically, naturally, I am fairly informal in speech and writing. However, one of my recent clients was in patent law. I wrote formally in the emails to that person's boss because he did. He wrote from a point of view of someone who's been in patent law for 40 years, and it was a traditional tone. And so I was a little more formal when I would write back to him. In general, though, I would say the world is trending informal. I think we are losing a little bit of the idea that big words suggest big minds. Sometimes people think big words might suggest a big ego. right? And so it's actually becoming okay to be less formal. Again, I'm always a little formal at first until I gauge what's okay with this audience, because I think it's better to default that way. But formality can also sound alienating, or like we're not close. Why are we being so formal if we're close, right? And so we find there have been studies lately showing even graduate school admissions do not favor the essays with the big words, the words that are, I could say, ostentatious or showy, right? I could have just said showy. And so we can consider a little bit. I would say it's better maybe to start leaning slightly less formal, as long as we've already judged that that's okay to do in the situation. I think, however, we would want to bring Scotty in on this, because the cultural element is huge here, where some cultures, whether that's an industry culture, a regional culture, a generational culture, do associate formality with respect, or are more hierarchical in their writing and speaking. And so it depends really on what culture, whether that's an age group or a part of the world or an industry that we're speaking or writing in, I would think. What do you think, Scotty?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, Erin. And I default the same way. Typically a little more formal in the beginning till I get to know somebody or get to know the scope of the project or the scope of the discussion. And yeah, the cultural issues are always curious, and they're always there. I don't think they have to be a hindrance, but I think being aware of your own biases. I mean, we all come into the world with biases. I grew up in Southern Arizona. I grew up speaking Spanish and English. My bias for pronunciation comes to American English from the Southwest. So often when I work with clients, I'll tell them that I think this word sounds a little odd to me, and then we'll look it up, and sure enough, it might be a British pronunciation, or I might not even have it right. So I think being open and conversational with your clients, peers, investors is really important, and trying to get a read on how they operate so you can mirror that. And actually, there's a business technique that I'm sure people in the audience know more about than I do, but it's actually called mirroring. So if we were sitting next to each other, and if you were leaning in, Claudio, I would probably lean in a little more with you, right? But if Erin, if you're leaning back and I'm trying to talk to you, I may also lean back a little further. So I like to think about that mirroring also in tone and intentionality, because those are the perfect words for our discussion today. I wanted to segue for just a second, unless there was something else that I missed. So I don't know about any of you, but I've been in circumstances, both just in general, like in an exercise class or in a meeting, where somebody walks in and they suck the air out of the room. And I think they're the ones who are delivering their content with snarkiness, and they may not realize it. And so if you're dealing with a manager, an investor, a partner who is having one of those days, sometimes you just have to kind of let them have that day, and then try to work your magic with a little bit more levity and some maybe a great idiom or different language. And Erin, you and I have talked a bit about this already, but trying to use a little bit of honey in your language. My mother always used to say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And I find that to be true. And I'm always nicer to people who are more upbeat and nicer to me. So even when that snarky person says something that they meant to be snarky, I think you can disarm it by using a little bit of honey and a smile in your voice and more gracious language.
I agree. We can often disarm someone by giving them power through our language as well. Because I think when we feel that the air got sucked out of a situation, it's often because that the person, the air sucker, was speaking or writing or behaving with self-focus and not having other focus. In speaking and in writing, the information is not for ourselves, right? If you're not journaling or taking notes, you are not writing for you. So we need to write with other focus, not self-focus. So I'm thinking, if I were writing back to someone who was that snarky person, what can I do to disarm them? I can give them respect in my writing, and I can look for words that will make them even snarkier and avoid those words. quick example, I try to manage my use of you and your, because these words can make a person feel, I hate to even do it, but I'm going to do it to you all like this, right? It doesn't feel good. And so I learned this when I was teaching college, that if I were putting a comment on a student's paper and they did well on something, I would say, ooh, here we are on page 3, right? You supported your point so well in this paragraph. Your evidence is spot on. Your, all the way, positive situation. But if page 3 did not have evidence, I did not say, you failed to provide evidence. Instead, I would take you and your out of it completely. What is the goal? What is the matter at hand? Oh, it's page 3. And I would write, page 3 needs more evidence. If I have a meeting with that student, typically they'll come in saying, yeah, we were looking at page 3. You're right, there's no evidence there. Let's get to work on page 3. This is not about you or me, it's about the paper. And so we can do things like that to disarm people, to just ensure that they don't feel accidentally accused, even if we never mean that, of course, but just starting to kind of hone in on language. And that your one is a great tip, by the way, for home life. Work with your partners, your family members, it's, did you empty the dishwasher, right? We could say, has the dishwasher been emptied? Like there are ways to use this in life personally as well.
I love this so much, because it really all boils back and down to know your audience. Know your audience, know your audience. And that is whenever we communicate. I had lunch today with 3 Navy vets, right? My language totally changed. It became more informal than ever before. The numbers of times that I use the F word, probably more than I use it usually in a month, right? But we had a great conversation altogether. So let's look at another question here, because Tatiana asked here, and of course, Tatiana, we can ask for advice. Of course, that's why we are here, right? And if we are having these language specialists here, let's give this one a try. Tatiana has a new tagline. She is building her YouTube channel, her social media presence right now. And just recently, she found some clarity about her true intended audience. Now, she came up with the tagline of helping adjunct professors create dynamic classes that students love and remember. Ladies, how can you help Tatiana? Is this good enough, or can you see something that can be improved when you read this tagline?
Well, I love the tagline. Yeah, I love it. Tatiana, we should connect later, because I love working with teachers and doing some of that as well. And that's wonderful that you're going to be helping people in an adjunct situation. A couple quick things that I saw in her comment. Can we put it back up or no?
Yeah.
Yes, sure. We can do anything here.
So a couple things I'll just point out here that I think are strong. I don't know that I'm going to have advice for you, because I really like this. Couple things that are strong. Number one, we're using words that are familiar to people. Probably the most difficult word here is dynamic, and it's not too difficult for a teacher who knows what that means in a classroom. So using plain language is key to getting other people kind of on board with what you're talking about. Secondly, we've got positive verbs. There could be a situation where we could write negative verbs, like helping avoid burnout or something like that. But we're using positive verbs here, which is better for that reader. So we have help, love, remember, right? So I would say use positive verbs, because that's setting a tone even when readers don't realize. And then another quick thing I had wanted to add in before about concision, and we can see it in Tatiana's tagline. Another really easy trick for writing concisely, other than avoiding the verb to be, is to start every sentence with who and what. Who did it? What did they do? Like we have students love, who, what. And we even have an invisible, who, what. I am helping, right? Adjunct professors. That is called front-loading information, getting your who and what early in your sentence so the reader gets informed quickly. So Tatiana's done all 3 of those things. I think the tagline's going really well. Let's see what Scotty has to say.
Well, yeah, and pull it up again, please, Claudia, because I would say getting to concise is nice, because Aaron, I've also read your book way back when it came out, and I I try to use so many of the tips that you've given me. So the only suggestion I would have, I agree, it's lovely and powerful, but maybe consider shortening it up a little bit. So perhaps you could think of saying, helping adjunct professors create dynamic and memorable classes.
Mm.
It just shortens it up. You get away from students, love, and remember, which is also lovely, but it just, how many words, do we need to remember? Less is more, I think, for many situations. And it's easier for me to remember fewer words.
Wow.
And a tagline.
I love that. I love that. Now, the thing here that you bring up in my mind is memorable is not as easy to say, especially for somebody like me that, English is my second language. What's your take there? If you have one word that's a little bit more complex or difficult to say versus 3 or 4 words that are all easy, like in Tatiana's example here, I find that easier. It rolls easier off my tongue when I say students love and remember than memorable, right? To me, that's just, what's your take on that?
Well, I would say 2 things. Go with what is easiest when you're conversing, but you can also learn your key vocabulary and just practice pronouncing it clearly to the point where you're comfortable using it. And you have to experiment with all of these things as well. You have to experiment with your language, your body language, and with your different audiences to see what really fits and lands comfortably for you. And you'll know whether it lands comfortably with your audience or not. But, you could have a tagline that's a little shorter, and then when you speak it, say it with more length, or the other way around. We're just changing words. We're saying the same thing, but with a different set of words.
I think, one more comment on Tatiana's idea there. And by the way, we could, Scotty's so right that we want to be as concise as we can. We could even just drop the word that, which is often possible, right? Where we can say something like, even though I had breakfast, I think I'm hungry. Or even though I had breakfast, I think that I'm hungry. That proves there was no use for that word, right? So we could maybe take that out, because one thing that would concern me about getting so concise as to lose the students is for Tatiana's audience, me as a teacher, I would want to see students in there. The power of a word, right? I literally remember switching jobs from a university to go be an associate dean at a community college. And in my very first meeting, I heard the word students at least a dozen times, which was something I had never really heard. It's shocking to say, in the meetings in the university. The word students was not something you would hear in a faculty meeting. And in my new job at a community college, I did hear it, and right away I go, I'm in the right place. Wow. So that kind of idea that these concepts might matter to the reader, and that makes it so there's so much to think about with writing, right? But good discussion there about all the different ways, the pros and cons of different changes.
Well, and you may have different versions also for different audiences. I was working with someone on their resume recently, and I've suggested maybe that she have 3 different resumes. Depending on who her audience is. And you might want a different resume, and certainly a different pitch deck for different audiences, right? If you're looking for a partner and academic research or engineering support, it's a very different pitch than when you're looking for venture money.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. Time truly flies when you're having fun. And if I look at the clock right now, we are getting towards the end. But I do want to bring up another question that Anthony asks here, and that is related to sarcasm. Should sarcasm be avoided? What's your take on that?
That is a great question, because in general, I would say readers are looking right now for authenticity. We're all getting a little tired of bureaucratic writing or AI writing where we don't feel like there's a person connecting with us. And so generally speaking, I think the time is right to start bringing in authenticity. And humor is one of those. I'll bring in humor to my writing once I know the person enough, because I think that reflects my authenticity. And if you're using sarcasm in a humorous way as a general part of your personality and it's authentic, there may be ways to do that. The issue, of course, is going to be that interpretation issue. So if it's written we know that, well, what if my reader just got out of a meeting where everyone was arguing and then they read my sarcasm right then, right? And so in some cases, if it's a Teams post or a text, when many people text for work, it's okay to throw in an emoji to show, I'm playing around here. But that's just the worry, who's reading it? What's the potential for misinterpretation? If we can take care of that potential, we do want to bring in our personalities, including our humor and our ways of speaking. And I would bring that back also to culture super briefly with generations. Different generations have different preferences with how they receive a text, an email, or other types of chats. And so it might be more or less appropriate with people in that way. Same with the emoji use, could be more or less appropriate in different countries, different generations, different industries.
I would also say, I think it's more gracious, or it's kinder to use sarcasm almost as a joke on myself rather than a joke on my audience or my reader. So, for instance, somebody's asking me to do something that I don't have enough time for, or they're really upset with the data I'm going to deliver. And so it might be like, whoa, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just letting you know that there are huge timelines involved. We're not going to make our quarterly fundraising, but let me tell you what the good things are. The other thing, another phrase that I love, and a friend of mine who's redheaded, years ago in investor relations, we finally caught up. We were trying to connect for months. And when we finally caught up and could have lunch, he said, my hair's on fire. I've been so busy. So I have this vision of like flames coming out of her head, rather than her saying to me, Scotty, you look like your hair's on fire because you're so frazzled. Yeah. She just talked about herself. And then we had a good laugh, and we could then compare notes about how wildly busy we were, how wildly things had gone awry in whatever circumstance it was. So I think rather than pushing it on my audience to play with it more about me or something that's not so emotionally charged, personally, I think then it can land. I think it will land more safely, but you never know. Again, you have to do a little bit of experimentation.
I love it. I absolutely love it. This discussion, we could go on probably for another hour here, because words matter, and intentional words, there is an art to it, to using it in a certain way. And to our viewers, I put the contact information to Erin and Scotty in the description here on YouTube. So if you want to get in touch, especially Tatiana, take Erin up on her offer, get in touch with her. She is such a delight to help you think through things and start using words that really, really have a profound impact on the reader and the listener. And with that, we are actually really approaching the end of today's program. And
can we do it again? And Tatiana, I'll help you also. I think we should do it again. And I have one crazy idea. Yeah. What if we had one session one time, or one pitch zone, where it was review people's taglines, or ask us to review a little idea. Short together, and maybe we'd get to 10, or maybe we'd get to 20. I don't know, but it would be fun. It's the wordsmithing that I love. I delight in it, and I think if people can delight in their
I love it. Yes.
It lands better, and it makes it more authentic. And if you can have fun with it and not be, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Oh, we all have those tendencies, but it could be fun. Just a thought.
Absolutely. Let's talk about this. Let's plan this out. And before we leave, a couple more comments. Thank you, Nathan, for your kind words. He found our session here insightful, inspiring, and fun. Solid nourishment, no empty calories. That's what you taught us, Nathan. That's what we are doing. And Tatiana agrees. Anthony agrees. And yes, you're making me blush. I totally want to be funnier. I'm playful, but quick wit doesn't come naturally. I always appreciate it in others. And yes, we will definitely have a repeat of this, or not a repeat, but a continuation. And in the meantime, just so you don't miss out, please subscribe to the channel, and you will get notified when our next episode is coming up. And with that, I thank everybody online that joined us today. I thank you, ladies. Absolute pleasure having you here today. And everybody out there, I wish you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And we shall see each other next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Stay on for a second.